Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Pow, and today I'm going to be talking about my priority for June 2020, which is Pride Month and also the Queer Lit Readathon. If you're not familiar with my monthly priorities, I will link a video about that below, but basically I'm going to spend this month focusing on queer authors. So in this video, I'm going to give a shout out to a couple of different queer booktubers, recommend a couple of favorite queer books that I've read in the past couple of years, and also talk about my TBR for June. So let me start with the shout-outs, beginning with Adriana at Perpetual Pages. Adriana is a non-binary Latinx booktuber who reads a lot of queer stories, a lot of Latinx stories, and focuses especially on YA and manga. So Adriana is so special because they not only read so many great queer stories, but they are so analytical and so concise in the way that they review things. I really love watching Adriana's wrap-ups, their reviews, anything they have to say really. There's such a good focus of social justice and equity and so many great things in the way that Adriana looks at books that I learn so much just from watching their reviews, and I get a lot of recommendations for things I wouldn't have otherwise even known about. Next, I'd like to shout out Russell at Ink and Paper Blog. Russell is gay and he reads a ton of literary fiction, especially new releases. So he really uplifts a lot of these new released books, a lot of things that I have never heard of. I'm not as in tune with the literary fiction world, but he reads so widely within that. Tons of queer authors, tons of authors of color. I get so many interesting recommendations from him. Plus, he's just such a sweet guy. The way that he talks is just so calming while also enthusiastic. It's just such a joy to watch his channel, and I definitely recommend it. And lastly, I'd like to shout out Ian at Nerd Chaos. Ian is such a wonderful booktuber. He is a trans man and he is a German booktuber who booktubes in German but makes English subtitles. So I really appreciate that. I actually really enjoy watching booktube videos in other languages when there are English subtitles so that I can understand. I think that Ian has such great analysis of everything that he reads. He reads very purposefully and has a very good lens through which he analyzes everything. He thinks about a lot of the social justice issues, about the representation of queerness, about the representation of race, and especially about ableism. Ableism is something that I really learned about through hearing Ian talk about it. So if you're interested in social justice at all, I definitely think that hearing Ian talk is just so informative. He reads a lot of fantasy, a lot of YA, a lot of nonfiction, really very varied tastes, but I just learn something every time I watch him speak, so I definitely recommend his channel. Now I'd like to give a couple of recommendations for books by queer authors that I've read in the past year or so that I've really loved. First, I'd like to recommend 9 Fox Gambit by Yoon-Ha Lee. This is the first book in the Machineries of Empire series, which is a science fantasy series that is sort of military SF. This series is really fantastic because the world building is just so unique. It focuses on an empire where their power comes from strength of religious belief, which is very fascinating. And in this, we follow Cheris, who ends up being promoted to the position of general and ends up having a past general's consciousness inserted into her because he was a brilliant general with great strategy. And there's so much in this series that is, one, influenced by a lot of Korean culture, which is great, but two, really explores a lot of different sort of ways that people can express sexuality and gender. There's so many interesting things in this book that have to do with gender because Cheris is inhabited by a male general and these sorts of things, and this is just really a fun series that is very engrossing and such a great read. Next, I'd like to recommend A Taste of Honey by Kaya Shanti Wilson. This is a queer fantasy romance that I absolutely love. It's so sweet. It is set in this fantastical world that is sort of inspired by Roman times Africa. And in it, we follow a young man who is kind of reaching adulthood and trying to decide what to do with his life. His family wants him to marry into the royal family so that their own family will have sort of better social status, and he has a lot of obligations and responsibilities there, but he ends up meeting and falling in love with a soldier from a foreign land. He is faced with some really tough decisions about if he should fulfill his obligations to his family and conform to his society's kind of strictures about who he should or should not marry, or if he should leave his homeland and go with this soldier that he has met and fallen in love with. It's a really beautiful story. It's got great fantastical elements, a lot of magic in it, and it just explores a lot of those choices that people have to make in a really beautiful and sweet way. And lastly, I'd like to recommend Hurricane Child by Kaysen Callender. This is a contemporary magical middle grade that is set in the Caribbean and follows a character, Caroline, who is dealing with some issues. Her mother disappeared about a year ago. She misses her terribly, and she's really struggling in school because she's bullied pretty extensively. Until that is, one day a new girl comes to town, joins her school, and Caroline forms a really close friendship and maybe more than friendship with this new girl. She also gets her help in trying to track down her mother, especially using some of these magical things that they see around them. Caroline and her new friend can both see a lot of the spirits that surround them. So this story has such an excellent atmosphere. There's so much sort of everyday magic integrated into this world, and it's all about this kind of queer little girl and her frustrations with life, but also her stubbornness and just her desire to find her mother. It's a very sweet story, and I highly recommend it. Now moving on to my TBR for June. The Queer Lit Readathon is actually only the first week in June, but I'm going to be reading with a priority on queer stories the whole month, and I am also going to just be looking at the prompts for the Queer Lit Readathon for all of these books. So I'm kind of doing an extended Queer Lit Readathon, just in case anybody was wondering about the timeline. The Queer Lit Readathon is hosted by Kathy at Kathy Trithardt and Rogan at Rogan Shannon, both of whom are just absolutely fantastic booktubers. I also highly recommend their channel, so you should check them out. They are linked below. And this time the guest host is the Tea Hags. So for this round of the Queer Lit Readathon, there's quite a few different prompts. I'll put up an image of the bingo board of all of the different prompts, and you get to choose one of your own. So my choice for my prompt is Queer SFF. So I'll talk about all of the books that I want to read for this month. I'm going to put 7 books on my TBR, and my goal is to read maybe at least 5 of them, although I will pick up other books throughout the month that have a queer focus. These are just some ones that I want to try to prioritize. So the first book on my list is Seeing Gender, an illustrated guide to identity and expression by Iris Gottlieb. This is a nonfiction illustrated book about gender, and it's all about kind of defining gender and explaining all of the different varieties of gender and expression. It's got a lot of kind of historical information, a lot of like mini bios of famous queer people. It's got also just sort of the author's own journey. So I'm really, really interested in this. This fits the prompts of nonfiction as well as host recommendation, because I heard about this book from Rogan Shannon. Next on my list is Shoutout, edited by Andrew Wheeler. This is a collection of a bunch of different short comics about queer superheroes. This looks absolutely wonderful. It is just so fun to read graphic works. I love short story collections, and this is all about queer superheroes. It just sounds like a ton of fun. So this fits the prompts of a graphic novel. I'm guessing probably also like queer friends, and my own of Queer SFF. Next on my list is The Map of Salt and Stars by Zain Jokadar. This is sort of a story that has 2 timelines, one which is from 2011 about a a Syrian girl and her family who are dealing with being refugees, and the other timeline which follows a girl in medieval Arab world who is trying to become a map maker. This is something that I had vaguely heard about, but I was reminded of when Zain Shoutout was part of the Social Distance Book Fest on a panel talking about a lot of modern literary fiction. I will link that panel below. It was really interesting and I loved hearing him talk. So I'm just really interested in this. And Zain Shoutout, I believe, is a trans man. So I'm not sure that the story itself is queer, but I think that it's important to read queer authors even when they write whatever they want to write. So I'm just really excited to read the story. This fulfills the prompts of backlist title and also 5-star predictions because I just feel like I'm going to really love this story. Next on my list is Swords Point by Ellen Kushner. This is a fantasy of manners about a bisexual swordsmaster. This is, I think, the favorite book of Rhea at the Bookfinch, who I will link below. And every time I hear her talk about this, I think I need to read this book. So I'm gonna prioritize it for this month and try to get to it because I think I'm gonna love this book. I really think that fantasy of manners is right up my alley, and sword fighting, that sounds awesome. So this book fulfills quite a few prompts, including queer sports, because swords fighting, non-coming out, because I believe in this world being bisexual is very normal, bi or pan main character, 5-star prediction, because I really jive with a lot of Rhea's recommendations, so I think I'm gonna love this, backlist title, because it's from quite a few years ago, and also queer SFF. Next on my list is The Lady's Guide to Celestial Mechanics by Olivia Waite. This is a female-female historical romance, which is about a rich countess who becomes the patron of another woman who is a translator of astronomical works. This book sounds like it is just one, a beautiful romance, but two, it deals with a lot of issues of class and feminism, and so I'm very interested in it. I know that Rachel at Kalinati, who I will link below, really enjoys this book, and I love historical romance, so I think I'm gonna love it too. It fills the prompt of rainbow cover because the cover is very red. Next on my list is Cantoras by Carolina de Robertes, which is a historical fiction about a group of Uruguayan women in the 1970s who are all lesbian and who form kind of a close friendship, and it follows them throughout the course of their lives. This is something that I've heard really, really good things about. Adriana at Perpetual Pages did a whole review of this, so I will link that below. And I have had this kind of high on my TBR for quite a while, so I really want to make time for it. This fulfills the prompts of female over 40 because this follows the women throughout their lives, so I'm pretty sure that they're going to be over 40 at some point in this. Also a host rec because Rogan Shannon has also recommended this book. And last on my list is Bloom by Kevin Panetta, illustrated by Savannah Ganucheau. This is a YA contemporary graphic novel that is about a boy whose parents own a bakery, but he wants to get out and go to the big city and be part of a band. He's just graduated high school, but he's working there for this last summer, and a new boy comes to sort of train and replace him, and they form a little bit of a romance. So this sounds like such a sweet graphic novel. It also sounds like it's just gonna be such a fun time to read about their romance, and this fulfills the prompts of summer vibes, non-coming out, I believe that this is not a coming out story, graphic novel, and again, a host recommendation. So those are all of the books that are on my TBR for June, although I'm positive that I'll pick up quite a few more in June. I have a long list of other books that I'm also interested in reading. If you have read any of these books or any of the ones that I recommended, or if you have anything that you want to recommend to me or any booktubers that you'd like to recommend to me, please go ahead and leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you.